Welcome to the Morning Phillips series, hosted today on YouTube. The Morning Phillips series, originally hosted at the Garage Co-working Space in Rapid City, South Dakota, was created to discuss philanthropy, civil society, and community. It is an opportunity to have a conversation with good people doing good things creatively and collaboratively. The format is a conversation, not a presentation. 2 tables, 2 chairs, 2 computers, and a community of interested people. Today we are pleased to have with us a triathlete, storyteller, and a national leader. A special thanks to the Bush Foundation, the Numad Group, Rural Philanthropy Institute, and the Garage for hosting today's conversation. Thanks to all those who have joined us for nearly 60 previous in-person conversations. Now with all that, we are pleased to welcome the President and CEO of PBS, Paula Kerger. Paula, thank you for taking time to be with us today, especially with so much going on in the world. Really appreciate your time.
So I'm a two-timer. How many others on your roster have done Morning Philip twice?
That's a really good question. There may be just there are only just a couple.
So how many have done live plus virtual? Am I the first?
Second. You are the second.
Oh.
Well, thanks for doing this. And you're on the East Coast.
I am. I'm in Virginia.
PBS is headquartered in Maryland.
In Virginia.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So our offices are in Crystal City, which is literally right across the bridge from Washington. In fact, if you ever fly into National Airport, you're basically flying into Crystal City. So for anyone that's visited Washington, that gives you a little context. But I'm actually talking to you from Round Hill, Virginia, which is about 55 miles outside of DC, and that's actually where I live. And so I live in the foot of I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, about a quarter of a mile away from the Appalachian Trail. And so for the last, 12, I'm starting to lose count, 12, 13 weeks, I have been running PBS from here. And about 92% of our staff have been all working remotely.
So we spoke about a week and a half ago about doing this. We were catching up and we were talking about COVID, and so much has changed just in the last week and a half with the murder of George Floyd. How do you, running PBS, where you're at, not in the headquarters, but how do you, running PBS with 92% of the people working remotely, respond and react to such important times and news that's happening today?
It's complicated, and there was a brief moment yesterday when I thought about suggesting to you that maybe we postpone this because right now it's all full court press. But I have so enjoyed my relationship with you. There was no way I was going to let you down for 7 a.m., 9 a.m. on the East Coast. So that's a little better, but it's hugely complicated. These last, I'll talk about the current circumstance. Just let me frame it a little bit with, sort of where we've been. So these last weeks have been profoundly difficult to sort through. We have an organization with a culture that is we're a close-knit organization. We have, just to give you a sense of scale, at PBS headquarters, we have under 500 people, and most of those people work in our offices in Crystal City. We have about 100 people that work in Springfield, Virginia, which is a little further down the highway, and that's actually where our operations center is. And so that's where, we manage all the satellite and broadband connections and all the guts that make public television work. And so we've been very proud of the fact that we really have created an organization where hopefully people can come and do their best work. And that means we do a lot of face-to-face. We have an office built, not dissimilar to your office, Matt, with a lot of team space and a lot of opportunities for collaborative work, because that's where so much of our good ideas come from, getting a cross-section of people around the table to work things through. Doing that virtually has been quite different. In fact, managing even some of the technical infrastructure virtually has been very complicated. And for some of our producing partners, like the NewsHour, being able to produce that broadcast outside of the studio is something we've never tried before. But I think technology, as we're enjoying now with this virtual morning fill up really gives us the flexibility to do different things. And, I've been taping spots for our staff and for our stations literally out of the corner of my bedroom. I'm tucked away in a little space right now that's, like a little alcove in my attic. And, and it has worked out pretty well. And you know what? Some of that video has gone into broadcast. So I'm using an iPhone. Today I'm using my laptop, but usually when I tape, I'm using an iPhone. And the only nod to technology as I did buy, I think for the princely sum of $20, a lavalier mic, which I clipped on that sort of helps the sound a little bit. But I think that coming to the current period, beginning the end of last week, this has been the biggest issue of discussion is what can we do that will be meaningful and make a difference? Unfortunately, we have a lot of experience over these last years with circumstances not so dissimilar. And I think that what has been important for us is to give our stations who have presence in local community the opportunity to convene and to produce content around that. So many stations have had town halls, have brought community leaders together, because I believe that the answer to most problems, even as intractable as the ones we're talking about now, are all based on understanding one another and having honest conversation and coming together with a sense of common purpose of that we build the communities in which we want to live and that we are in this together. And that's not just a tagline. That needs to be something that we all feel. It's very hard to do that in any virtual way. And so the fact that we have stations in every community around the country, 350 separate stations, 179 licensed organizations, we have the opportunity to do that. We can't do that now. Most of our stations are doing what we're doing, which is working remotely, which you're doing right now, Matt, which is not convening everyone in that wonderful gas station in South Dakota. So how have we thought about it? Obviously, NewsHour has been an anchor of coverage. We've had, fortunately, some reporters in Minneapolis who actually are based there. I think that makes a difference. I think it makes a difference when you're reporting on a circumstance if you have people that actually understand the community, because then I think you start to get at the heart of the real story and not just your understanding of it from, a scant amount of knowledge. No deep community roots. I think it makes a difference in news reporting. I think one of the big challenges in our country is the lack of and the decline of local journalism. I think that's something we all should have a common stake. And then we are doing it. We haven't announced this yet, so you'll be the first to know. We are moving to trying to do some sort of national town hall at the end of the week that they'll anchor. We have some really great programs we've produced in the last recently. One is a terrific frontline piece that was just done this year called Policing the Police, which we just released. It's streamed now, and a number of our stations will be broadcasting it. We did a project with Twin Cities Public Television in Minneapolis called The Talk, which is exactly what it sounds like. And that will be rebroadcast. And we're looking at a whole series of other projects. We're assembling, we have a great archive of independent film representing the perspectives of lots of different people, which we'll be curating and streamed. So all of you watching will have an opportunity to see. And we're also looking at the possibilities of, we have some work that we've done out of the creative space, out of the artistic space. I think everyone has something to share in this period. And so trying to figure out how to loop it all together into one cohesive piece is what we're working on right now. But we're doing it with very limited capacity and just, but it's important. So we're just trying to figure out how to put all the pieces together and make it work and make it easy for our stations to be able to take advantage of it. So we can really try to create community by community, the kind of conversation that I think our country so sorely needs.
Thanks, Paula. The idea that there must be so many decisions that need to be made, not only to produce something like policing, is it policing by police?
Policing the police, yeah.
Policing the police. How do you know, or how do your producers and directors know that they the perspective they're getting is the perspective that you want to present on PBS.
So I think part of our contribution to to the national dialogue is we work with extraordinary producers. So Policing the Police was produced this past year by Frontline, which is our investigative journalism unit. And we work with extraordinary journalists. Some are employed from within PBS, and some are people that had worked in other media organizations. We partner with newspapers, and we've partnered with, ProPublica, all kinds of different media organizations together. But I think have the best editors and producers, and they have the experience and the skill in making sure that in putting together important pieces like this, that we're getting at the truth. I am very proud of the work of all of our producers. I'm especially proud of Frontline. Most media organizations have largely gotten out of the investigative journalism business. There's all the shows that we used to watch, have all become true crime shows. And, part of the reason I think that organizations do that is that, I think they're addictive to watch. I think that people are fascinated by some of these personal stories. But at the end of the day, I am not sure, if I'm looking at where to invest our resources, I want to invest my resources in an investigative journalism unit that's looking at the stories that make a profound difference in our lives, around the stories that need to be told, uncovering truth, speaking truth to power. And all of this comes with risk, which is, I think, why so many media organizations have gotten out of the business. And so I trust our team, very experienced team at Frontline. Rainey Aronson, who runs it, who was one of your morning fill-up speakers, is, I think, our finest producer. And in addition to running to ground the important stories and giving it the careful oversight that it requires, is that she's also very focused on making sure that we're putting that content in places where people of different ages and experiences can come into contact with it. So we produce a full documentary series that's broadcast, it's streamed. She'll take pieces of it and put it on places like social media. Section of people that are interested in the stories that we tell, and we just need to make sure that they find what we're doing.
When you think about all the stations and all the partners across the country that you have, that content's going out, they're producing content during this time in the last 12 weeks, maybe we can break this in two parts. During COVID, the pandemic, mm-hmm. What was it? Was there a thread that you were seeing coming to headquarters from all the stations? I'm going to ask the same thing just in the last week and a half.
Yeah. So let me talk about the COVID circumstance. It's a little different, and there's also a piece to what we're working on now that I also want to share. So, obviously, we were focused on a few things in terms of content. One is making sure that, as there was so much bad information that was floating around, we wanted to be able to ensure that we were getting people the information they needed, both about, that could impact their own personal lives, but also to really understand the complexity of what was rolling out, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so, obviously, again, NewsHour has been a big anchor. Frontline has done 4 documentaries. 3 have already aired. 1 more is in the pipeline. And we also have, we did a special town hall with information on everything from that related to health issues to financial issues, which is obviously another piece of that. So we were very focused on the telling the story. Nova did a piece on the science of vaccines and so forth. We've done a couple series on pandemics that we actually brought back. So again, this is when you have a great library of content that is, at your disposal. It gives you an opportunity to do a lot more than just what can you, scramble to produce. A couple weeks before, I guess about a week before we actually went into quarantine, I got a phone call from Austin Butner, who is the superintendent of LA Unified. They own a television station, a public television station. They only have a couple employees. And he said, look, I think our kids are going to be out of school for a period of time. And I'm very worried about the children that don't have access to broadband. We run a service called Learning Media. It has more than, it has hundreds and thousands of assets. Some of them are content produced by PBS, some of it content by partners like the Library of Congress and NASA and local community organizations and so forth have built it. Our stations all contribute in content. It is all core curriculum material organized by grade level and by genre. And all based around standards and all contextualized. So, very easy for teachers to use in the classroom. We have about a million. We have about a million users a month that use it. It's free. And our stations actually make it available within their own communities, and some of our stations will add in their own content that's related to local history. South Dakota Public Broadcasting is a big user of Learning Media. And so we took some of those assets and began to build it into something that that could become a television broadcast block. I talked to people like Ken Burns. Ken had called me very early on and said, look, there's not going to be a baseball season right away. What if I give you baseball to stream again? People are missing it. And so I called him back because we've been working with him to expand some of the work in Learning Media. And we've been putting together a whole series of courses, plus for adults, because a lot of adults are interested in with some being at home and having their a rich experiences as well as kids. We looked carefully at the programs that he had produced that really came at a time or reckoned to a time where we truly were in it together and sort of called to our higher purpose. So the Roosevelts, World War II, documentary of the war, national parks. So we've begun to broadcast those as well. And so I think that, what we've been doing in this near term. So anyway, we built this work for LA, and our stations around the country began to pick it up as what they're referring to as at-home learning. Some stations have just taken exactly what we did for LA, and others have begun to customize it and add in their own content. I was just on a call last week with a group of stations in central Kansas that have taped a whole series of courses they're going to run all summer in 6-hour blocks to try to close not only the summer gap, but to try to pick up some of the core concepts that kids would have learned in the last semester of school, principally focused on elementary school. And then finally, the other thing that I didn't mention when I was talking about the last few days is that I think some of you may be aware that over time, we've been very focused on providing content that is helpful to parents talking to their children during difficult circumstances. Fred Rogers years ago used to talk about when something bad happens to tell children to look for the helpers. And it's, sort of that core idea and many others to help parents who really struggle when kids see images, particularly on television, to try to understand and process what it's about. And so we are pulling together right now. We had done that around COVID. We had put together some material, not just around difficult times, but, basic healthy hygiene, appropriate for kids. And right now we're putting together additional material that we can broadcast and put up in digital forum to help parents really talk to their kids about very complicated issues around race and violence and just the circumstance that we find ourselves in right now.
Paula, you lived in New York City. We, over the last months, have seen the devastation, at least on TV, the reporting of the devastation regarding the pandemic. And now, when we've spoken in the last few days, talked about we see a murder in Minneapolis. How do you process this? How do you, running an organization that is producing for others all the time? How is this for you?
Yeah, it's I have a colleague, my COO actually still lives in New York, and he would commute, it's in the East Coast where distances are not quite the same as they are in South Dakota. It is not so uncommon for people to travel longer distances, and his spouse works in New York, so he travels back and forth. And so I'm very personally aware of everything that is going on in New York at the time. It is hard to fully get your mind around it all. Beginning with, in the last weeks, the city, I mean, we all have seen those shots. The city is pretty deserted. I remember, I think about, snow days. So again, East Coast sensibility. Although New York does better than most, snow comes down and people stay inside, and the cities become deserted. And to me, that's what the city looks like. I actually, I've spent a lot of time in these last 12 weeks, and particularly in these last few days, thinking about just the personal feelings of all of my team. If we were in a building together, what I would have done yesterday is I would have brought everyone together in a sort of an all hands type of meeting, and really use the moment for people to talk about, their feelings, and our managers know that these are important times, that you really need to pay attention, because we all have different experiences. And as much as I can empathize with some people's experiences, mine are not the same. Some of my colleagues, I don't know what all of what is happening right now, how that impacts everyone, because I know it doesn't in the same way. It brings up memories, it brings up all kinds of things. And so it's the thing that I'm very focused on, in fact, which I'm doing this afternoon, is an all hands virtual meeting. I wrote yesterday and shared some of my feelings about, what is happening now through this entire period. We've really encouraged our team to do a lot of check-ins with staff who are all working all over the place. Some have actually moved outside of the area. I don't want to tell on you, Matt, but I know you're not in South Dakota right now. I mean, that's just how it's the nature of things. People have moved to be close to families, to be helpful in different ways. And so I'm very focused on trying to make sure that people feel connected. And I'm very focused on people that are coping with managing small children and trying to work at the same time. It was devastating for many of my team early on in the process, when first the governor had announced that our stay-at-home order was going to be in place until June 5th. And now clearly, as all camps and daycares and so forth have been canceled into the fall, we're not going back to our building until probably September. And by the way, we're moving. So we actually will never go back to our office. And that has significant impact on people. And I'm particularly focused on people who live alone, for whom the office environment is a very big part of their social fabric. Not everyone that lives alone, the office is the core, but for some it is. And so, I'm trying to pay attention. I guess this is kind of a long-winded answer, but you've tapped into something I've been thinking about a lot over the last day or two, particularly talking to a few of my colleagues who have been just devastated by what they're seeing around them. This is really a moment for us to try to come together, and in some ways doing it this way is very helpful. We're focused on people's faces right now. Hopefully you're drinking coffee, and I just want to point out I do have my coffee mug. That was purposeful. Yeah, we're all drinking our coffee together, but we're looking at one another, but we're not able to touch one another. And that is a true shame. And so being able to use whatever this platform allows to at least have some sort of human contact, I think is really, really important, and something that we all have to pay attention to.
I think when we spoke about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, I had been hearing from people just how difficult things were getting, just that people were getting to the end. 10 weeks shelter in place, or whatever, however many weeks it had been at that point. And then the murder of George Floyd, and the country is responding, where do you go from here? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I could ask everyone that's on this call what you think. I don't know that I have any better vision. And by the way, it's all braided together, right? I mean, I think that, this was horrible. This was horrible, and we all watched it. We watched it happen. And I think that the fact that we have been sheltering in place and that experience is very different. I feel very fortunate that I have a home, that I have enough food, that I have a job. That is not the case for many of our neighbors. And I think that the thing that for me has been very complicated is, as you look forward, you don't exactly see how this is all going to play out. Many times, if you're in a natural disaster, a hurricane or a flood or a tornado, even when the devastation is just extreme, there is a path to rebuild. And I don't know what that path is moving forward. I do know, Matt and I have talked about this a little bit, that what happens moving forward is going to be very different from where we are now. And some of that may be okay. Some of the reset coming out of this current circumstance may be okay. The fact that we are all focused more on one another during this period, I think is very good and very important. I don't know about any of you watching, but for myself personally, which I think is what Matt was trying to ask me before, I sort of dodged around to talk about my own stuff. I'm spending time when I'm not worried about PBS, really thinking about my own life. And, to paraphrase the wonderful poet Mary Oliver, what will you do with this one great and wondrous life? It's a profound question. It's so easily squandered. And so what does all of this mean? The things that I thought were important in January and February, not so much. I used to spend all of my time on the road, which is how I met Matt in Rapid City. Probably not so much moving forward. I think for me, it's very important to be connected with the people that I'm, working alongside, and friends and family. So, so I think that for many people who are going through different conversations, we at PBS are trying to think about, what does the next 18 months look like? What should our programming look like? We're doing this wonderful project that, if you haven't found yet, please do, American Portrait. If you go to PBS/American Portrait, you can record your own observations about whatever it is that you want, but particularly about this period of time. We're collecting all of that, and as part of a much larger map of the country, to try to get a sense of who we are. We started this project with the idea that we would do it following this election, as recognizing this election was going to be very difficult, and a very difficult time for the country, not knowing what we're going through now, and thought that it would be helpful coming out on the other side to do a series of documentaries in January that try to get a sense of who we are, how we think about ourselves, how we think about our families and our life, and doing that as a way to really build bridges, to help us all see that we have much, much, much more in common than separate us. And to answer that profound question of, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean? And how do we, as Matt and I talk often, how do we make sure that the stories of all are told, and that we are really bringing in the perspectives so that people that live in communities across this country can tell their own genuine stories? That was the whole idea. And so now having this moment, and being able to capture how people are feeling, I can tell you that it is a full range of emotions. And so as we look at our programming coming forward, we're thinking about a few things. One is, we have a number of productions that are in hiatus. You can't tape a show like Antiques Roadshow when you're social distancing. We had a whole summer of taping. This is usually when we tape, all canceled. So, so we have series that we're going to have to figure out what we will do with. As we do a lot of British drama. All of the British production has ceased. Some will start up. at some point, and some, we're looking at a broader range of international film, which I think is actually a good thing. Being able to bring more opportunities, but we're faced with real challenges around production limitations. But I think even more important than that, it's what is relevant and what is important. Where should we be putting our limited dollars? We're a tiny media organization. We have a big outsized imprint because we're in communities across the country, but budget size, we're a speck. And so it really is very important for whatever resources we have that we invest wisely. We've been spending a lot of time thinking about all the different digital platforms where people are watching, and particularly we're very interested in making sure that we're connecting with younger viewers. And so thinking about the content as well as making sure that our content is in the places where people are likely to look is important. So it's a little bit of all of that is part of at least how I'm thinking about, what does it look forward, but what specific issues we're going to be wrestling with, I don't know. If a lot of organizations go through something called scenario planning, where you try to envision different futures, and not knowing that you will never really pick which one you believe you're going in, but you try to imagine how your organization would deal with various scenarios, so at least you have them in mind. I think where we always get stuck, which is in the position we're in right now, is to imagine the unimaginable. Would anyone have thought that we would be all sequestered for months? No one would have thought that. No one in January, no one would have thought that. Even as we watched it happen in China, no one would have thought that would have happened here. And so figuring out how to manage and how to best move an organization forward, with this idea of really not being able to chart the future, as I think is always a challenge, but I think particularly so now. So I think the best any of us can do is try to imagine what different futures might look like, and just make sure that we're prepared and that we're nimble and that we can pivot. Not always easy for nonprofits, as Matt knows. It's hard for nonprofits to take risk because we don't want to disappoint those who fund us and support us. And if you get government funding, Lord knows someone's always, standing in the wings somewhere to say, see, they did that and it didn't work. That really hurts nonprofit organizations. We need to be nimble. We need to try innovative things, recognizing we may not always hit the mark, but if we can pivot and try something else, then that oftentimes is how you grow and actually come up with the right solution that really will have impact.
Paula, what's also, I think, interesting too is what's bringing people out. We're there in the everything that's happened in the last week and a half. With that, and with COVID and George Floyd murder, that question that you asked, what does it mean to be American? Can I ask you that?
It's a good question. I mean, I look, for the last 14 years, I've had an amazing gift. I have visited all 50 states. I have spent a significant amount of time in places of the country that I've never visited before. I've talked to so many people, teachers and political leaders and business leaders and families. And I've sat in programs geared for kids who are on free lunch programs whose parents may not speak English. And, I have seen so much of this country. And I think that, and I also am part of a public broadcasting system that is global, so there's public broadcasters everywhere. And we are set up different than any other because of what makes us uniquely American, which is there is a amazing tradition of volunteerism and community mindedness. And it's not that there aren't communities other places in the world, there are. But I think that part of what defines us is a scrappiness, is a willingness. This is when we're at our best. Is a desire to come together and to be greater than our individual parts. That's the best part of America that I see. And I think if you watch a lot of news, you see another America. You see an America that is at tension. I think you don't always see as what Ken Burns refers to as our better angels. Um, but I also see a country that has never dealt with serious issues that have been at the very root of the founding of this country. And I don't need to tell the people of South Dakota what I'm talking about. I also see no real resolution to very deep divisions that go back in our history that we've tried to bring forward in one of the programs that I didn't mention that, we're that I would like to rebroadcast right now is Skip Gates' recent series on Reconstruction. I think I know a lot about U.S. history. I learned a lot watching that series, which we broadcast last year. And I think, part of our challenge is our ignorance, is that we have not tried to learn enough about ourselves and how we got here. And by ourselves, I mean, our collective selves. And so I think that, as we look forward, you look at, all of the awards that Americans win, everything from, creative, work coming out of our country is extraordinary. You look at all the Nobel Prizes that have gone to science, and you look at, just this constant desire to excel and achieve and so forth. We need to be in a place where that is embraced and celebrated. And at the same time, we need to make sure as a country that we're not leaving people behind, and that we are, in fact, tying back to, I think what a lot of us believe are our ideals, that, that we believe in community. And as I said, we build the communities in which we want to live.
Who is showing themselves as a leader during this time, in your mind?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that really well. I mean, I see a lot of great leadership at the state levels, and I see a lot of people, both political parties that have stepped up. I think part of the challenge, that's happened in Washington is that we've somehow forgotten how to govern, and everything has been so focused on the politics and the race itself. But if you're a mayor, if you're a governor, particularly if you're a mayor, then you have to you're running a community. You have to lead, and I think where some of the great leadership that I've seen has really been at the local level, mayors and governors across this country who have stood up. We in this area. Larry Hogan, who's a Republican governor of Maryland, has been upfront and out front, I should say. Governor Northam, who is the governor of Virginia, and Muriel Bowser, you could not get three more different people, but the three of them together, and those are the three that I've paid the most attention to, because obviously as a organization that is based in Washington, but that has employees that live in DC and Maryland, and paying a lot of attention to what each municipality is thinking about the current situation. And all three of them have really stood up and I think done a great job in trying to make sure that, and balancing, keeping the people of this community safe, as well as trying to make sure that, we're able to move forward. We've been pretty, and not as heavily hit as as New York, but, we've been significantly impacted in this area. And, to make sure that those municipalities with people of both parties have come together has been something important to see. We need to do more of that.
PBS has been referred to as America's largest classroom.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope PBS teaches?
Well, if you go back to our history, my old station was WNET, Channel 13 in New York. The E stood for education. Many of our station call letters have E in them. Many of the stations, including South Dakota Public Broadcasting, were started with the idea of being a classroom of the air. And it was started out as a state network. Actually, they were purposely located in Vermilion, proximate to the universities, so that it could really take advantage of using what was then the nascent technology of broadcast to be able to bring the best teachers to every part of the state. And so a number of our stations are part of state networks with the whole idea that they would be educational. And if you look forward at, how our programming has developed, obviously everyone thinks about the programming that we do for the little ones. Sesame Street, has taught generations now of kids how to read and their numbers. Everything is based on curriculum, really trying to understand how kids learn and giving kids that may not have the opportunity to enter a formal pre-K setting at least the opportunity to be even with those that have had deeper experiences by making all that content available. But then when you look at the fuller range of the programming we produce, series like Nature and Nova, I'm hoping that, what is a challenge sometimes for us is that we try to serve many. So I'm hoping that, we are increasing the country's science literacy, both in the work that we do for the little kids, to Nova and Nature and science specials, which have always been a big part of public broadcasting. I think about our history. We don't do as much in world history. I think we should do more. We've done some series, but a lot of, Ken Burns' entire work is U.S. history, with really trying to answer that profound question of who are we? I mean, that's the thread through every one of the films and the series that he's produced. I think that, this idea of personal exploration, really giving people a chance to see something, and particularly in the arts, I think that's been very important. A lot of people have some of their first experiences in some artistic expression watching it on public television. So I think for the larger, viewership, education, and we try not to make it seem like spinach is really an important piece. But, a number of years ago, many of our stations did, actual telecourses. My old station in New York, when I was there in the early days, used to broadcast them overnight. And we'd send schools catalogs, and they could look up what was in the schedule, and then they could, videotape them and make them available to classrooms. And now you have broadband, which gives you the opportunity to create a great library that's accessible at any moment. So as I mentioned when I was talking about the LA circumstance, so we've built this. I think everything we've done over the last 50 years, this is our 50th anniversary, by the way. I never thought I'd be celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. I thought we'd be doing tributes to Julia Child or tributes to Fred Rogers, and we're doing a little bit of that, but mostly our 50th anniversary is really focused on how do we serve America? How do we take everything that we've learned over the last 50 years and use that as something that will hopefully make a difference in the lives of the people that we hope to serve? And so, in the education space, we've now built this learning media library, which I said had 1 million, views, 1 million users a month. It's now 3 million a week. In central Missouri. And they've all said, we're using this in the classroom. We didn't realize it was here for us. It's free. And so hopefully one of the things that will move forward beyond this circumstance is this idea of really expanding our work in education.
Paula, what are you reading these days? Is there time to read?
Huh?
Is there time to read?
Yeah, I actually have been reading, because, I do like to watch television. It's harder. I used to be able to know everything that was on TV. You can't do that anymore. And so, I opportunistically watch things that, people tell me about. But right now I'm rereading 100 Years of Solitude, which sounds so funny for me to say that out loud, but that's exactly what I'm reading right now. And It is such an amazing, beautiful book. And the thing that I am enjoying in reading it, it is so truly and heavily immersive. I've been reading. I tend to read more fiction than nonfiction, though I dabble in both. I read a lot of biographies. I'm always interested to understand, why people have done the things they've done, and I'm particularly interested in reading biographies about artists and musicians and so forth. Where does creativity come from? Where's that spark? How do people see the world and then create something that is so amazingly beautiful and powerful, that connects us, that so I'm always interested in that. But for the last weeks, I've just been immersed in a range of books, and I was reading a whole series of more contemporary books. And I don't know. I went back to 100 Years of Solitude. I've pulled out a couple things. The book, that have I don't know, a little bit more depth and timelessness. I think are the things that I'm hungering for right now. So, how about you? What are you reading now?
The Team of Rivals. Trying to go back and.
Oh, that's a great book. That is a great book. Yeah.
Lots woven in there about leadership and people coming together, and how and what an important time in our American history to learn from as well.
Yeah, especially timely. Yeah.
You mentioned Fred Rogers a few times, and you mentioned his advice to children and to find helpers. Paula, what would be your advice to all of us here and with what the country's going through? What advice do you have?
Well, I think when you and I talked, and it's funny. I have talked to a number of people who recently who have a bit more time. I talked to a friend yesterday who was talking about some of the books that she's been reading, and she has a lot more time than I've had. I feel like I've been busier, even not being on the road. I feel like I'm busier right now than I've ever been, because the issues are so complicated. And, as I mentioned a little while ago, we're also moving in the middle of all this, and our move is complicated because we have a technical facility that, we're moving a piece of it. All of our, as I said a little while ago, probably half an hour ago, we have most of our technical operations in Springfield, Virginia, which is a facility that we own. It's a very old building and a slightly newer building that, houses all of our of what really is the nerve center of PBS. And we had a little bit of technical capacity in our headquarters building, which was necessary for editing and so forth. But with, cloud and, with technology now, it doesn't need to be within the same headquarters building. So, and the headquarters we rent. So I'm trying to pay attention of how to make my successor's life easier. So I thought, well, we'll move all the technology to the place so it's all consolidated together and in a building where we can make an investment and it's ours. And that has proven to be very difficult. Some of our equipment is quite old, and some of it, we're trying to manage how to move. We've had to do some shifts in power and so forth. So it's very complicated. And so I think that, as we've been trying to manage all of this, what I have felt has been really important is, and particularly with, as I said, we've been in this building 15 years. For many of my colleagues, including me, it's the only place that I've known. And you're moving to a new space. We're not going to really have closure. I'm trying to figure out right now how to get people in so that they can, purge and pack, so that we can move sometime in September. And I don't know what September will look like. My guess is that, we'll have some level of telework when we move. So we won't have closure in the old space where you probably would have had, party and brought everyone together. You won't have an event in the news space where you bring everyone together because of, again, complications of having too many people and, so forth. So, so I think, as I've thought about, just that, my biggest advice, which is how we've been trying to, run things over these last weeks, and particularly as we've had this, additional layer of complexity that we're navigating through, is the need for us to communicate and talk to one another, and to talk honestly to one another, and to listen really carefully, which is sometimes the hardest of all, because we all have our ideas. We want to make sure we say them, and I think that relates to helping colleagues or helping friends through a complicated period like this. But I think it's really about the larger way that we manage our lives and our civic lives. Is we do have to figure out a better way that we can talk to one another, and we can bring people of different backgrounds and understandings and beliefs together around a table, and know that we're not going to walk out having convinced anyone that our view is better than theirs. There's something wrong in that whole notion of, someone has to win or lose an argument. It's, the way that we grow, both as individuals as well as communities, is that we do come up with that sense of common purpose and recognize we're all going to have to give something. And I think that, as I really wrestled with so much over these last weeks in particular, I've thought a lot about that. What are the ways that we really can be better at talking and listening to one another, to find that common path, to recognize, as I've traveled around the country, that people are inherently good. People inherently do want to do the right thing. And that it's just that people's understanding of what that is may be different. And how do we try to align that a little better and recognize that, we do all inhabit this earth together. And somehow we got to figure out how to make it work better than it has been.
Paula, I really appreciate your time today. The conversation we had yesterday. Thank you. And I know that it would be wonderful to do this in person. And
one day, then I'll be a
three times. I wish we could present you with a piece of artwork from the Black Hills work, Susie Kappa Art Studio, but instead, due to obvious circumstances, we'll make a donation in your name to the organization.
That would be great.
As they serve people in the Black Hills. Really, thanks, Paula, for all the time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. There's a survey on the chat, in the chat box. Please fill that out and let us know how we're doing. Paula, have a wonderful day. Thanks for all you do.
And thank you, Matt, for making this opportunity available to all of us. You're doing exactly what I just talked about. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Paula.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.